Hey, this is a discussion that we're going to be having today. This ties in a little bit with the Extinction Level Event podcast stuff, but this isn't a podcast episode. This is just a discussion that I'm going to have with you guys about the two main pillars of modern civilization. So we're gonna talk about those. Like I said, it does tie in a bit with the Extinction Level Event podcast concept and things that we will talk about over there. But this is not an episode of the podcast itself. We're going to talk about the two main pillars of modern civilization. Now, I know that if you look up the definition, at least the last time I looked it up, it talks about civilization and society, and it always brings up culture, and it talks strongly about the culture. And that is not one of the main pillars of modern civilization. Culture is a byproduct of civilization. Now, I know that you can use that as a metric. You can look at the culture and say, this is what the culture says about modern civilization, and this is a way to measure. But it, in and of itself, isn't one of the two main pillars that make modern civilization. Now, I'm saying modern civilization, it's really civilization in general, but this isn't really how you go from, hunter-gatherers to now we have civilization. That milestone really is agriculture, because it is the thing that anchors you to a place where before, when you're hunter-gatherers, you just go where the seasons are. You're like a migratory bird, you know what I mean? You just, when the seeds are happening here, you go there. When the buffalo are roaming here, you go there. So you're not necessarily anchored. Is that a better thing or a worse thing? It really depends. There's a lot of things that it can depend on. I think if we go back and look, this is really, it's a hard thing to quantify as far as using this particular metric, if you will. But life expectancy was like extraordinarily low. But was that specifically because we were hunter-gatherers? Was it just because we didn't have modern medicine? Like, there's a lot of factors. You can't just say, hey, we were hunter-gatherers, therefore life expectancy was low. Having said that, it isn't a non-contributing factor. All right, so that definitely was part of the equation. So now, with modern medicine and everything, the average human lifespan is more than 20 years, right? Or even 30, I think, in some cases. They got, quote unquote, pretty old. They had their 30-year-old elders. So this is really, when I say the pillars of modern civilization, I mean, taking it past the fact that, okay, now we have agriculture and we're going to stay in these places. Like I said, culture develops out of these things. We even had culture in the hunter-gatherer days, because that was just groups and tribes and early forms of, civilization and societies, right? Those things existed, but they don't exist in this more modern structure. So when we're talking more, obviously, everybody's frame of reference will be today, right? Modern civilization today. This is going to be everybody's frame of reference. Even historians who know a lot about, ancient civilizations and how they developed through the ages and society has formed from the primordial beginnings, right? Your frame of reference is still going to be to look outside. There's roads, there's buildings, there's whatever. One of the inspirations for talking about this is the future, obviously, especially here in the United States. Our future and what it's going to look like is very, how do I say, uncertain, I guess is the best way really to put it. We don't know. There was a certain certainty before, because there was a conformity to certain ideals and methodologies and a framework for which things happen. And now the talk is, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, you're just going with a conspiracy and blah. No. We're going with what the people who are going to be in power have said that they're going to do out of their own mouths. This is what they said they are going to do. Not what they said they should, or even what they would like, or, hey, wouldn't it be great if my generals were more like, Hitler's generals? We're not even saying that. What we're saying is the things they literally said, these are the things we are going to do, period. There's some of it's like just day one, blah, blah, which is almost never the way it works. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying a lot of these things just take time. And that's just the way how things work out. But in this particular case, we're talking about things that they have mentioned, and it's very, it's a lot of change. It's going to be different. Regardless of your view, positive or negative on it, it's definitely going to be different. So I think in the light of that, it's important to have a discussion about the two pillars of modern civilization, because they're the ones, at least here in this country, in others as well, for sure, and in others, they've been under attack for a really long time. In some, they've basically won against these pillars. And you could say, well, they still have modern civilization, so you're full of crap. Yeah, they still have modern civilization, but they're not really advancing it without having these pillars in place to some degree. Now, you can have these pillars out of the hands of the common person and in the hands of tyrants and dictators and blah, blah. They still exist. They just aren't given out freely, available. It's not widely available to the common masses. So these pillars exist. Even in these countries when they have been attacked and destroyed and dismantled, they do still exist. They just look very different and have been controlled to an extreme degree, because this is how you domesticate the population, right? You chip away at these pillars. So, that's a lot of setup. Like I said, it's not a big revealed thing where I'm trying to, I want to get that context out, but I think we can't really go further on this discussion without talking about the actual pillars now themselves. So the two pillars of modern civilization are education and science. So, again, I know a lot of people will say, well, how about arts and culture and all that? And again, I'm going to say those are byproducts of civilization and culture and society. Sorry, like your tribe, your family, culture comes out of those things. It doesn't develop those things. Nobody was walking around stabbing buffalo with a spear and looked at a cave painting and said, oh my God, I'm going to build the first telephone or the first clock radio. Culture doesn't drive civilization. Culture can inform civilization, like, oh, these cultures exist and they develop, and all of a sudden, bam, you have manners and politeness, right? And those can come from culture, but they don't, invent the indoor toilet. They don't create aqueducts. These things are necessary for a modern civilization. Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, by the way, all amazing. So I don't want to be, well, you just hate. No, those guys are, geniuses for sure. And then they were amazing. And I love listening to their music. But they did not advance modern civilization. They were a byproduct of the time and the culture that existed. Culture itself is a byproduct of civilization. You don't have culture without people together. You don't have people together without civilization. So society and civilization are the, fertile grounds for culture and, the arts and all that stuff. But first we have to have civilization, in this case, modern civilization, what it looks like today. And the two pillars for that are science and education. So, what are we really talking about? Everybody knows science and education. Sure, those are words that are familiar with people. But when I say science and education, I don't mean the education system, and I don't mean the scientific process. I mean, it is a scientific process, but I don't mean getting a degree and publishing papers and going on CNN and telling everybody that you know more than they do, right? And that you studied why mole rats have, 20% less methane in their gas than another creature. I don't know if that's true. I just made that up, but I'm just saying there are people who study things like that. And I'm not saying that information is pointless or it can't be important, right? Especially, data is data. It's really how you use that data. But what I am saying is that when I'm talking about science, I'm talking about the study of our environment, of our world, of reality, right? So people say, well, I don't care about science. Science doesn't mean anything to me. It's never helped me do anything. Okay, but that's called ignorance because, and I'm not even talking about scientific invention here. I'm talking about a process by which you gather data to better understand your world. So, for instance, fire hot, right? So that's not science, that's just common sense. I hate to break it to you, but common sense comes from science. That's where it comes from. The common sense isn't science, which is why it's often wrong. But it does come from science because all science is a gathering of data and the postulating of a hypothesis based on observation. That's a lot of fancy words to say, me see, me understand, right? Fire hot. This is scientific understanding. Fire hot. You get that? You get the simplicity there? There's no 20 degrees Kelvin. That's not really a thing. Degrees and Kelvin aren't the same. But you know what I mean. It's not 100 degrees inside my oven science. This is fire hot is a scientific observation. You saw fire. You made a hypothesis of, I wonder if I can stick my hand in and it'd be okay, right? You stuck your hand in, it hurt a lot. You probably might have even gotten some blisters or something on your hand, right? Or maybe just a light redness. Either way, fire hot. It was not comfortable. It was painful. All these things happen. You have now made a determination based upon the observation of, with your eyes, but also with your senses, right? You felt the hot fire. You saw the fire. You saw that your hand was actually in it. You saw that it was fire, right? You made all these little calculations and observations to prove your hypothesis, but you would never call it that, and you're sticking your nose up at the thought, well, I wouldn't call it, I just stick my common sense again. Well, I don't float off the earth because there's gravity, even if you don't understand gravity and what it does and why. The why is the reason science exists, really. Science exists as a discipline to give us the whys. But the scientific process is simply, I understand that I won't float off the face of the earth. That is a scientific understanding. And again, someone's going to say common sense, but common sense does not negate science. I realize there's this huge battle between common sense and science, but common sense comes from science. Science is merely understanding something, gathering that data, and then making a logical conclusion based on it, right? So somebody else, gets burned with a blowtorch that's at at the blue flame level, right? And then they say, well, fire not hot. It burned the hell out of me, but it wasn't hot because once the fire gets to a certain heat, it actually burns the nerve endings so that they don't even receive or send signal quick enough for you to understand what's happening. Now, the wound is going to be painful, but you didn't feel fire hot. But guess what? Fire was still hot. So if you think that just because, I already know I stick my hand in fire hot, therefore it's common sense, Yeah, but it's not always true, because you stick your hand in that blue flame, fire not hot, but it still does the same thing. And that's where science comes in, because science then goes, whoa, well, why fire not hot, but fire still burn? Then we understand the processes and what's happened and why something is the way it is. And that fire's still hot, we just didn't feel the heat. So the fact is that common sense comes from science but isn't science, and that even when you're walking out your door, every little step that you take for granted. When you were a child, when you were a baby, when you were born, you did not take these things for granted. You didn't understand any of this stuff. You didn't even know what the hell object permanence is, all right? All this stuff is learned when you're little through scientific methods that you have no understanding that you're even doing, but you're doing them. So in a way, science is the ultimate common sense. I see things, I make sure that this works right. I stick my hand in another fire, still burns. Stick my hand in a few more fires, always burns. Fire always hot. This is now a rule I'm making. This is what I'm calling a scientific law now, which is something we try not to say anymore, because our understanding and knowledge of things is always evolving, right? The law comes from an arrogance from scientists who believe that they had everything figured out. And so this is the way things are. So they came up with this scientific, the law of gravity, the law of this and that. But as our understanding has evolved, we realized, oh, that's really not the way it works. Like, there is no just, we all understand this is exactly how it works, and we know everything now, so therefore there's a law. So therefore it's always a theory. The theory of evolution isn't because we don't understand and know that evolution exists, because it's still a theory. It's because our understanding of it is constantly changing. Therefore, it is a theory, not a law. And that whole scientific law is actually outdated, not because those things are right and just everything else is less right. So, I guess we should switch to education and talk about that. We talked about science for a while and understanding what science is. And even though I'm sure there's a ton of people I still haven't convinced to know that they do science every day, even if they are totally against science and think that science has no place. And I'll never convince those people, because they're not really convincible. Their ignorance is their sword and shield. So the other side is education. So when I say education, what do I mean? And why is that one of the pillars with science? Well, we'll get over why, I guess, after, because first we need to understand the pillars, then we can understand the why. And I think the why is pretty apparent when we understand what. And the fact is, education is now the passing down of that information. So fire hot, right? Do I need all my kids to stick their hands in a fire to prove to themselves that fire hot? No. I can say, hey kids, fire hot, don't do that. Don't touch the stove when it's on, right? Don't stick your head in the freaking oven, you nincompoop. Whatever. This is education. This is us passing down information. You're like, no, it's common sense. Again, with the argument of the common sense. Common sense comes from science, but common sense isn't science. Passing down information, even fire hot, is education. Anytime we pass down information from one person to another, it is educating them. It does not validate the information that we were given. It does not mean that the information we're given is the truth or in any way correct. That's not what we're talking about. We're simply saying that by telling somebody something, you are educating them, whether it's for their good, your good, their ill, whatever. That is still the act of education. You're taking information and you're passing it to people who either don't have it, maybe don't have as complete a picture of you, or maybe it has different information. And then you get into what Socrates called dialogue, which is where you guys discuss the information that you all have to hopefully parse out the truth. So education, I think, is a lot easier to understand, because I don't think there's as much pushback on what education is. I think a lot of us understand what education is, and I don't think it's a tough concept to catch on. You tell somebody something, you're basically educating them. I think even though a lot of people are like, whatever, that's not really educate, but I get what you're saying. I think that's an easier sell. So I don't think we need to spend as much time on that as on science, which is just the misunderstanding of its existence and what it really is really one of the biggest driving forces between people accepting science and not accepting it, right? And the problem is, then once you get into that, you then find experts in their field, right? And the problem is that being called an expert and being an expert are not the same thing. And you might say, oh yeah, well, why do we call them experts if they're not? It's because the vetting process for what makes an expert is not standardized. And because of that, and because the standards haven't been, shall we say, road tested, even if we do have standards, right? You get a lot of people who in fact are experts by how we're defining it, not because they're actually experts in their field, but because the definition of expert is something that they are in fact qualified as expert. So we end up with people who are being called experts who don't necessarily meet any kind of standard qualifications, but are still legally allowed to be referred to as experts. So that's why you're going to have people who are quote-unquote experts who actually have no idea what the hell they're talking about, right? Because when you can call anybody an expert, depending on your definition, nobody's an expert, right? We still have experts, but the word then loses all meaning, because we've defined ourselves out of it, essentially. So that's one of the big problems with experts, scientific or otherwise, is because of a non-standardization in what we define as an expert, right? It's not even really a legal term, even though there are experts brought into like courtrooms and stuff that should meet certain legal standards, but they don't always. So expert, yes, they can tell us a lot of stuff that necessarily could be wrong or just completely harmful, right? So I get it. A lot of people don't trust experts because of this. It's a sad fact, but that's just the way it is. But science and experts aren't the same. Having these dumbass experts who aren't really experts is not really a reflection on actual science, right? And what does science do? Science produces data. And what we do and how we interpret the data is really the process of deciphering the universe, right? There are people who go over papers years, decades, maybe hundreds of years, depending on how much data and information we have about any particular scientific study, right? And find completely different conclusions to the same thing, because the conclusion itself is born out of the data, but it's how we're looking at it, how the data can be applied, what is the truth of that data. And because of that, the science and our understanding of the world, it stays the same as far as the science go, but the understanding can change, or an understanding of the world will change. Now, we can't talk about that without now talking about the future and what the issue is and what the issue will be or could be, because that's really the point, right? We're talking about this because we want to know what's the future then. Why is this important? Why is this discussion happening? Why are you bringing any of this crap up? The problem here is, and we talked a little bit about this in a podcast that I did. I think it was episode 1. Might have been episode 2. I don't know. But we talked about the dissemination of information and how limiting that is going to be on the agenda. It's going to be one of the important issues. That's the word I'm looking for. It's going to be an important issue for the administration moving forward, and in general for people who want unfettered power. Education is a weapon. and it is a weapon that they need to take away from people, right? For instance, if I am going over to the next door neighbors and I'm just like wiping them out, right? Not that I am doing that, because I am not, right? Let's get that straightforward here. But if I was to go over to the neighbors and wipe them out, and every time like they sell the house, right, because, oh no, nobody's there now, the house is empty, let's sell it again. And I always wipe out the neighbors. But nobody knows that. Nobody puts it together, nobody understands, and every time the neighbors are gone, we just throw up our hands and go, oh, I don't know. Having the slightest clue what could be happening or why it's happening. Oh well, let's sell the house again. Then you're never going to know that I'm going and wiping out the neighbors every time. So it essentially is irrelevant. And if I ask a poll of people to ask them, you know, am I a good guy, or what do you think? Especially if I'm, say, like the mayor, right? If I'm the mayor and I'm running the town, and for the most part people think I'm doing a good job, and even though these people are getting wiped out in this house, nobody knows that I'm wiping them out, or that it's even a human thing. As far as they know, maybe there's poisonous gas under, but nobody ever detects the poison. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it could be anything. Who knows? Maybe a mini black hole comes and just wipes out the people for something. Nobody knows. They're just gone. So if you ask the people who have no idea that I have somehow a connection to that, if I'm a good person doing a good job, if I am in fact doing a good job and presenting as a good person, they're all going to say, yeah. And the difference between that and the reality of me going and wiping these people out is knowledge. And knowledge is what's passed on through education, right? You know, somebody will probably say, wait, I thought you were just saying science and education are linked. Well, the fact that I am doing something, the fact that you could observe it, the fact that you could measure it, the fact that you could see people were there, the fact that you could see people are now not there, these are all observable facts and therefore scientific information. So science is in there for sure. Science proves these things exist or don't exist, that I'm doing it or not doing it, that I am or am not mayor. All these things are scientific, quantifiable facts. So yes, even though we're not talking about it as science, we're just saying knowledge. Knowledge is gained through science, which is just, again, observation. You're just looking and seeing things and knowing whether they are true or not. And the scientific method is a bit more rigorous to actually get true scientific knowledge, rather than, hey, I saw this thing, therefore it's true. A lot of conspiracy theorists will see something that they believe, and all of a sudden that's scientific evidence. But scientific evidence doesn't work that way. But you are doing science by seeing something, observing and coming up with a conclusion. That is science. It's just that your actual scientific evidence and conclusions may be wrong, but you're still doing science. There's a huge distinction there that I think is important. But here we're talking about something that can be scientifically proven. It is knowledge, and it can be passed down. So now all of a sudden everybody finds out about what I'm doing. All of a sudden I'm not a good person, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing for the rest of the people. You know, they don't want me as mayor. They'd want somebody who else can maybe not do quite as good a job, but maybe doesn't wipe out their neighbors, right? So the difference there is the knowledge. By withholding knowledge from people, they do not know what a terrible person I am wiping out my neighbors. So knowledge is a weapon I'm using against them to keep them from finding out that I'm really a horribly terrible person. And they may never know that. And until they do know that, I'm free to do whatever I want under the guise of the kind of person who doesn't do that. Knowledge is a tool. When you withhold it from people, they can't make informed decisions. And when they don't make informed decisions, they can make really bad decisions. So that is why education is essential, and that is why dictators and tyrants, anybody who wants to have unfettered power, unchecked power, wants to hold back knowledge, wants to limit your education, which is the passing down of any knowledge, that they might not be as great a person as they want people to think they are, that their companies aren't as great as they want people to think they are, and that their motivations aren't as great as they want people to think they are. So this is why education is such a big weapon. They had, as I'd mentioned in another podcast, the Boar's Head outbreak that I think I heard recently killed like 3 people, or was it 9 people? I don't remember, but I know people died from that E. coli outbreak because the standards for the company had been dropped because the oversight was gone, right? The oversight was given to them. It was up to them to rule themselves, and people always think, well, of course they're going to do great because they don't want a bad reputation. Well, then why do they have a bad reputation? Because we gave them the power. Well, mistakes happen, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure. If you think that this was just a mistake and it couldn't have been, checked, nobody at any point in the process could have checked and found out this was bad and just not put those out. If that's what you think, then you're right. And I can't convince you otherwise. But the fact is, we have lots of ways of checking on these things and deciding whether they're true or not, and, basically making sure people don't die from the food that they're eating, right? We have ways to keep that from happening. And it is through education. It is through transparency, which is the knowledge, right? And that knowledge being handed down is then education, which is, yes, Mr. Raven, thanks. I'm happy for you. And that education then needs to be passed down to the people, right? And then they can make informed decisions of, oh crap, giving them the oversight didn't work. When was the last time we were poisoned by Boar's Head? Oh, like quite a long time. So how about we put the oversight that was keeping us from getting poisoned as often in there and keeping people from dying and put that back? But that's not the way it is, because misinformation is out there. And as they say, the, what do they call it? The false truths or the lies. I mean, they are lies, but I can't even remember what it's called now. It'll come to me. Everybody's yelling at it. They're like, blah, blah, blah. I know. It was like a catchphrase thing. And I know what it is, but it's not coming to me. Anyway, so the control of education, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about limiting. So now that we understand about the limiting of education and knowledge and the power that it holds, we need to now talk about its implementation. So one of the things that the new administration and Republicans in general have been saying for a really long time is they want to get rid of the Department of Education. So let us for a minute look at education and the Department of Education and why it is important, if it is important, right? So the educational system has in and of itself kind of 2 pillars or 2 avenues. One is public and one is private. And this obviously isn't limited to education, but we're talking about education right now. Now, the private sector is all about making money. The public sector is all about not spending money. I know they kind of sound like they're kind of the same thing because they're both about not spending money because that's how they make money. But the public one's about not spending any money because they don't have any. And the private one's about not spending any money because they just want to make a ton of it. And so the private sector is motivated to give you the education that they want you to have while getting you to agree to pay them for it, right? And the private schools are run and the directors are members of the upper class, right? They have a ton of money and they are well invested on your lack of education, because the less you know, or the less of the important stuff that they don't want you to know that you know, the more likely it is that they are to stay in and keep power, which is their whole shtick, right? And the public system, its standards are set by the Department of Education. The Department of Education can set these standards and certify schools so that when you look, you say, oh, this is a certified university, or this is a certified this or that. They're certified by, the Department of Education, so that you know that when you get an education there, you have the information going forward that you're supposed to at that specific grade level. So when we get rid of this Department of Education, whose real purpose is to set the standards and hold to account those institutes that are educating you and your children, because it isn't just kids going to school, adults do too, right? Then we have no set of standards, and anybody, like the experts now, right, can just start saying, I'm a college professor and not know a damn thing. We already have enough of that with people who actually did go through the educational systems. Let's say, how do I say? We don't need people who are going through I'm just going to apply to a church online and be an ordained minister because I paid them a couple of bucks version of education, right? We already have enough of that with the online schools who can be questionable at times, right? I'm not saying every single one is questionable. I'm not saying every single degree is questionable. What I'm saying is, in general, they aren't held to the exact same standards, right? They're, give us your money, we're going to give you the plaque that says you got an education. That's what you're going to end up with, more of that and more severe examples if we did get rid of the Department of Education. We're just not going to have anything that's standardized. There won't be any standards. There won't be any institute to hold anybody to account, and to say, even when they say we're holding to the standards, who's going to say otherwise? Who's going to be there to say, no, you're not, right? There's going to be no department that does that. So we get rid of the Department of Education, we get rid of standards, we can teach people what they want. And what they want is for them to believe in certain doctrine that conform to strict policies of obedience. They want you to listen to what they say and not question it. And that is the goal. And education's job for them is to make sure that you learn that and stick to it, because your life depends on it, and they want you to know that, right? So they are going to make sure that information is given out to the degree they want it to. Only the information that they want can get out. Look at North Korea. That's what we're looking at here. A strictly controlled regiment of information. And it's funny because we just had an article about the North Koreans sending, 10,000 troops to Russia to help them with the attacks on Ukraine. And North Koreans now being out of North Korea, right, which blocks their internet access, it blocks the information that they get. Like, all the information that they have as people is severely controlled by North Korea. So when they got out, they discovered pornography, and now they're just obsessed with it, right? And who could blame them? Because, porn's great. For those who indulge, for those who don't, it doesn't matter. It's like, what should I say? It's like going to a club. A club. There we go, a nightclub. I was going to say that's not a bar is what I'm thinking, but a nightclub's actually a good example. It's like a nightclub. There's lots of people who like to go to nightclubs, go dancing, go drinking, listening to really loud, techno, house, whatever they're listening to nowadays there in the clubs. And that's their thing, and they love it. And that's awesome. I don't want to take that away from anybody. I don't want to be caught dead in those places. I will not enjoy it at all. I don't do the dancing. I'll have a beer every once in a while, but we're talking like, one every couple of months or something like that. We're not talking like, maybe once a day, twice on Sundays. Not that that's even a bad thing. Even that's pretty moderate compared to some people, right? But I don't even do that. It's not a philosophy thing where I'm not allowed. No, it's not really my thing as much. I don't mind. I'll pick up the pace a little bit if it becomes like a social thing and I hang out with some people and we're like, hey, every Friday we'll have some beer or something. Like, I don't mind that. It's not a problem. I don't drink that much, though. It's not, the most enjoyable thing for me. I don't do the dancing, and I don't like that type of music. It's not for me, right? But I don't want to take it away from anybody. They can have it. Enjoy, do your thing, but keep me out of it. And I don't mean I don't need to hear about it or make sure that I think that it doesn't. I just mean I don't want to get dragged into it, right? But I don't mind if you're doing it. I don't care if you want to tell me how great of a time it was. I'm going to be bored listening, but whatever. I'm not going to be offended by it, right? So that's the way I'm looking at this pornography thing. Like, if it's for you, it's for you. If it's not for you, it's not for you. It's not a big deal. Nobody cares. The only time it becomes a big deal is when people are offended that other people are enjoying it, and that's just stupid. Shouldn't be offended by the fact that other people enjoy something you don't. Just leave them alone. Let them enjoy their thing. It doesn't hurt you at all. And then they say, well, yes, it does. It degrades the moral fabric, blah, blah, blah. And they have all these reasons and excuses that if you actually look at them, don't pan out. Especially because people have done scientific studies on these kinds of things. They're like, all these things you're saying, we looked at it. We're like, okay, maybe that's true. Turns out none of it was true, right? Not a single bit of it was actually true. Okay, we need to move on. We got a lot of stuff that I want to get to, and we're already pretty late into this discussion. So internet blocking is going to be a thing. They're going to start wanting to block the internet like North Korea because they can't limit your information just by limiting your education anymore. That used to be a thing. Now they have to get rid of the information completely from your grasp. They can't allow you to have access to it because that's just as bad as giving you a good education. So internet blocking is going to have to become a thing. You're going to start to see different sites. It's going to start with porn because porn's the easiest thing to point out and say it's offensive to people, especially in such a puritanical society as we have here in the U.S. Porn is going to be an easy target. And so they're going to start limiting that, a step away from making it illegal is just to make it harder for you to get a hold of, right? And that'll make the industry start to die off. Nobody's going to be making any money. All the OnlyFans girls are going to, start crying. OnlyFans will have to, straighten up and fly right. Because I know for a while they were trying to get rid of their adult content. They were saying, hey, we don't want to do this. We want legitimate advertisers. They lost such a huge chunk of their revenue. And they're like, you know what? Never mind about that. Go ahead and do the adult stuff. We're cool with that. So they learned real quick that that's where their bread and butter was. So OnlyFans is going to have to go back to that thought of, well, we won't have the adult stuff and take a huge hit because they already know that's how it works. So otherwise, OnlyFans wouldn't be around anymore, right? All the people who make their money on OnlyFans is going to be SOL. The porn industry, mainstream and independent, will take huge hits, right? Because of the limited access and what they're going to do on our end. And then they're going to go after the industry itself. And that will really be one of the first, salvos. And people are like, oh, well, that's great. We don't like that anyways. But that's because they're short-sighted. They see this as a one-issue mission, and it is simply the beginning to get your permission to start getting rid of information that they don't want you to have. And this is just an easy target to start setting up the infrastructure and the power dynamic that they need to start getting rid of information that they simply don't want you to have completely, right? Just look at all the pushback against the critical race theory, which is just, I believe, a right-wing term. I believe nobody on the left ever called it that until the right started calling it that, and then it's just like, well, that's what it's being called now. And it was a mistake for them to continue to call it that after the right had called it that, just because they're like, well, we want to be on the same page and know that we're talking about the same thing. Some fought back against it, but for the most part, that's what they did. And all it is, dude, we had slavery here in the United States, and slavery was a big part of a lot of stuff. You can't help the fact that something existed, and they're saying, yeah, but we can help it by not telling anybody about it. We just were kind of like, meh, you know, and we'll color things differently with terms that kind of let you know that it happened, but that you wouldn't actually understand what we're talking about when we say it because it's so vague, right? That's what they want. And people are like, but we need people to know the actual truth and the facts, not some vagaries. And so the big battle was just, do we tell people the actual stuff that happened, or do we tell them that stuff happened? You know what I mean? And so that was really the big thing. And they were able to, in a lot of places, limit that with fear-mongering. And so a lot of places thought, well, we don't want people to just be like educated as like urban hip-hop drug dealing stars. That had nothing to do with it. It's just telling people the things that happen, not, okay, well, this is a black class now. We're teaching you about black history. That's all this class is. Forget world history. George Washington. You know, it's all about George Washington Carver, right? It's like, no. They're just giving you all the information instead of limiting it, which, from my personal point of view, I've always been resentful, let's say, of the education system for dumbing crap down and essentially giving me wrong, not even just not all of the information, but actual wrong information, because the right information was too complicated for me to understand. And rather than just teach it to me, but a little bit at a time, they just taught it to me wrong and figured, well, we'll fix it later. You're just too dumb to understand, so we just won't tell you the truth. We'll tell you a lie that'll just be like a placeholder. And I've always been resentful of that. Give me the goddamn truth. Anyway, sorry. So we're going to have internet blocking. And then the next step is that they want to indoctrinate the entire country into the Catholic, Protestant, Christian religions, right? And it can get to and people are like, well, what are they supposed to do about it? What are they going to... So they're going to start moving us to a much more fundamental Christian society, or that's what they want. And I was listening to this YouTube channel that's not somebody I really normally listen to. I don't find them particularly engaging. If this is something that a lot of YouTubers do, I probably do it myself, but they kept giving me the same information over and over again, and it's like, oh, but I don't know what it is. Something like, people are thirsty. People need to drink more. They're not drinking enough water. They're thirsty. They need to have more hydration. They're running low on the water intake. They're thirsty. And it's like, you've basically said the same thing for the last 5 minutes and not giving me any new information or even change and sometimes they do sprinkle in a little bit of extra context and stuff, but you've just dragged out this people are thirsty for 20 minutes. And it is freaking annoying that you can't get past people are thirsty. Give me more context, give me more information, tell me, well, there's this study and stuff. That I don't mind if the whole thing is people are thirsty, but you give me a lot of information about it. But if you're basically literally saying people are thirsty, but then changing up the, synonyms, then that's just not good. And a lot of people will do this and harp and make the whole thing on that. But you need to move on. It needs to not be 20 minutes just of that. And this guy has done that a few different times where it'll be this one thing. And it's not just that they bring up the subject and bring up different information and history. They basically just say that same thing over and over and over again. It's just like, come on, dude. I'm already bored. The fact that they're not very charismatic. The fact that they have nice information, that's why I watch, but it's not the kind of thing I want to subscribe to and watch all the time, because it's kind of a slog to get through to get the information, right? But I was listening to them, and they were talking about being somebody of a non-religious affiliation and some struggles that they were having of what was coming up, and that made me think about the fact that we are moving towards this Christian doctrine, this solidification of this is what you will believe, this is what this country is going to represent, regardless of what we told you it was going to represent when we founded it, right? It's definitely going to be a religious country, right? It is going to be this country wasn't just founded, but exists as a religious symbol. And you have to be a part of that or get the hell out. And I was just thinking of, well, how are they going to implement something like that? Because this, of course, ties into education, because this is the education they're giving you instead of other education, right? This is a replacement of the standard education with religious education. These are the doctrines and theories that you will have to know as scientific fact. And I'm thinking, well, they're going to say, hey, you can't not have a religion, you can't not believe in God. That's not really a thing in this country. Or you have to leave or you're going to be punished, right? Or you're going to go to jail or something. So how do they enforce something like that? And I'm thinking, well, they can ask you, and you can obviously just lie. I'm like, what if you have to just lie to survive? And then I thought, okay, you could do that, but they're going to want proof. Like just your word that, yeah, I believe in God and everything you say is correct isn't going to be enough. They're going to want to make sure that you're following up on the doctrine in the form of, say, going to church every week. And I thought, well, what they could implement, and I say could because this is something I think that's a possibility if they think about it, that they get to this point and do it, is they could start a church roll call where church is going to be like a homeroom, right? Where every Sunday you're assigned a church to be at, right? A church that meets their minimum qualifications for the standards of religion of what this country represents. And they are going to know whether you are going to church every Sunday or not. They're going to know if you go and if you leave early. They're going to know if you don't participate in the bake sales. They're going to know if you don't put money in they're going to know all of this stuff. It will all be written down to prove that you are a part of the religious system that they are putting in place to further domesticate the population, right? So church roll calls is something that could be implemented. So I've got some pages of information here that I want. Okay, so we're, let's see, where are we? I'm now looking at a list of impoverished, here we go. 18% poverty level, 20% of the country is impoverished. Now that might seem like kind of a small number if you think about, well, that means, 80% of our country's doing pretty good. No, it depends on where your poverty level is. Our poverty level right now, I think, is at like 25 or 26,000 a year, which is not enough anymore for people to live on. So even though based on their number, we're at 20%. If you base it on a more realistic number, if you base it on single income family and you take into account rent or what's the word I'm looking for, where you pay for your house every month. You know what I'm talking about. Anyways, the word's not coming to me, but if you look at those rates of payment and food, especially now, I think you're going to find that the poverty rate is a lot higher in like the 30,000s, where you could still either barely or not really get by, right? And in order not to be impoverished, you essentially should have to not live paycheck to paycheck. Every month you should be able to save some money. Every month. If you can't save money every month, and when I say save money, I don't mean, well, you just don't buy cereal this month, the kids have to starve and you save. I mean comfortably save money. And I don't mean comfortably by you've got a brand new car and you're saving money. I just mean comfortably like your kids don't have to starve that week in order for you to save money. You don't have to sacrifice to save them money every month. If you can comfortably save money every month, you are not impoverished.
Anybody below that, and like I said, I think we're looking at like 30,000, maybe even more now a year. At that level, this percentage goes way the hell up, like way up. So we're looking at that. And just real quick, the correlation between education and income. There's median lifetime earnings. People with bachelor's degrees earn $900,000 more. Let's see, what is this? Annual income for people 25 and older was $75,000, while those with bachelor's degrees or higher got $118,000. It's saying bachelor's degrees because I guess nothing below that counts. I got an associate's. I couldn't afford the bachelor's, so I guess my education doesn't count, I guess. In 2023, citizens with a professional degree, I don't know what that means because they're not being specific, $172,000 a year, while those with less than a 9-degree education, 9th grade, education made $36,000 a year. So education benefits accrue over a lifetime, which is why the link between education and earnings is so strong. So there we go. They're saying that there's definitely a link between education and how much money you're going to make, which is why they don't want you having an education, because they want you to be stuck in basically China's making $10 a day or less, which is 48% of their population, a little bit more than 48% of their population, right? Basically half their country is just industrial, making sweaters and material goods that we then import and buy because it's cheap, because they're making less than $10 a day, like their entire day, not an hour, a day. So that's what they want for us. They want a huge industrial boom again, where they're paying all of us less than $10 a day. They're employing our kids, and we just need to take what we get and be happy we got it, right? So I think this is a good place to end this discussion. I'm actually running out of time. My program here has a max. I already maxed it out, going over through some basically not important statistics. So I'm kind of just redoing the end here because it cut out in the middle of reading all the boring stuff that nobody cares about anyways. So I'm just going to end it with that, So I'm just going to end it with that, our discussion on the 2 pillars of modern civilization through the next little while. So with that, I appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.